I had kind of hoped we would hear something about the Pokemon Performance patch, but I'm keeping my eyes out for that one, so stick around if you're looking forward to seeing what they can finally do there. Other than that, the Nintendo Direct started okay and ended pretty damn great. The original Metroid Prime released on the GameCube in November 2002, and it marked the triumphant return of the Metroid series. As you'd expect, we've been going through the game, checking the performance, comparing it to the original GameCube version, looking at how it performs in handheld mode as well as docked, and also looking at the visual quality to see what the remaster really offers, with the best way of doing that to be comparing it directly to the GameCube version. Now, I know you can emulate the game at higher resolutions, but we're going to compare the original to what Nintendo have brought out today. We'll also go through any other things the game offers in terms of extra features and each of the specific new control methods. If there's anything I missed, then let me know in the comments. Does the remaster offer a truly prime experience? Well, my name's Mark Walker. If you enjoy the content, consider sticking around. Now, let's find out. The remaster of Metroid Prime is going to set you back £34.99 or your regional equivalent, and it comes in at 6.77 gigabytes to download. This is a single player only experience with an average runtime of around 14 hours. With that said, with any Metroid game there's a lot of hidden and side content to find if you so choose, so you could easily double that runtime. But let's jump in. We'll start with the controls. Now, you're given the classic control method if you so choose, but that may feel a little unusual if you weren't familiar with the original release. Essentially, it means that you control the X movement of the camera as well as forward and backwards with the left stick, exactly as the GameCube did, but they've also included dual stick mode, which will feel familiar if you're used to modern first-person shooters, with the right stick controlling the camera, the left doing strafing as well as forwards and backwards, and then the triggers to lock on as well as shoot. Fans of gyro can rejoice. In a way, gyro support is here with a couple of options. There's the hybrid mode, which essentially tries to combine the dual stick controls with the gyro ones, and it works quite well. You will need to have your split joycons, and it means when you're holding the right trigger, you can aim freely. I prefer the hybrid combo over the pointer controls. Again, it will really depend on which version you're used to playing, but the pointer controls essentially unlock the reticule and allow you free movement of it with almost a weighted momentum, exactly like the Wii trilogy. You can adjust the sensitivities of the X or Y axis independently of each other. You can swap the beam and visor, swap the beam and missile, and again in this regard there's a lot of customization to make those controls just the way you want them. As far as audio options, they've also gone to the effort of including full or partial narration. Now, the partial narration reflects the global release, while the Japanese release had full narration, not just that in the cutscenes. You can choose whichever you prefer. In the extra content section, you've got all the standards, concept art, including new remastered, improved assets, which will be unlocked as you progress, as well as the soundtrack, which you'll unlock again as you move through the story. Jumping into the game, you've got the option of standard difficulty or a more forgiving mode known as casual. And then we get down to the visuals. You're looking at 60 frames per second in both docked and handheld. It's 60 frames per second if there's a lot going on screen, 60 FPS in larger open areas, and also 60 frames per second even when enemies are loading in all around you. This is exactly what we hope to see. So if you were worried about performance from that regard, then you can rest a little easier. What's interesting is the frame pacing. The frames seem to be delivered at a very consistent rate, and it makes it feel even more smooth than it would otherwise. With most Metroid games, there are a few transitions when loading between areas, certainly not long at all, and not much to distract from the overall action. For me, performance is always the most important aspect. But what about that remaster? What about those visuals? And I think the only way really to do this correctly is to look at the original game alongside the remaster. So if we hop over to the GameCube version, we can clearly see the aliasing as well as the lower resolution, but it was still a well stylized and quite pretty in its own way experience. When you jump over to the same area on the Nintendo Switch version, it is night and day. Obviously, we're looking at native resolution, but to me it looks like the textures have had some serious work work, as well as lighting. Now, I mentioned at the start that emulation can increase the resolution, but still things are looking very good on Switch. Moving from one area to the next and just assessing the overall image quality, I think people will be generally impressed by how well the game's aged with just a few tweaks to the overall image. Samus herself looks incredible, and I think a few corners have potentially been not cut necessarily, but intentionally not used to make sure that performance is maintained. One of them would be anti-aliasing. Now, while by no means does it look bad, you will notice a few jaggy edges, and it doesn't look like there's post-processed anti-aliasing, which can give the image an ever so slightly blurry look. Instead, everything's so crisp while still having some jaggies. It makes me think they just kept it very low. Delving a little bit deeper, we really can see the huge improvements in that visual quality. When comparing the two side by side, not only that, we can see how much has been changed. The lights here have been added in where they didn't exist before. The textures have been completely reworked. Lots of the models have been redone with much more detail than previously seen. This seems to be the case across the entire game. So while I initially thought this was simply an up-res, it looks like Nintendo have gone to far more effort than that, and rightly so. Foliage in different areas, new meshes, it's entirely different in some places. Really quite impressive. Back on the subject of the textures, sometimes when we have remasters or re-releases, you can see a very clear line, usually on the floor, where the anisotropic filtering, if lower, creates a real transition that's quite obvious between the high resolution asset and the lower. To my eye, things are kept quite high here, and it's very impressive. If this got released without ever having had the original, I don't think there'd be too many people that would be complaining. That fantastic art style has carried across brilliantly. This is orange and teal the game, until you reach those larger areas, with the enemy designs being as excellent as ever. Before we look a bit more at some handheld footage, I want to talk about the HD Rumble. Not something that I usually mention, but it's quite notably a step above the standard here. When you morph into a ball, or when a door opens, or indeed when you lock on and fire your weapon, there are specific rumbles for each of these things, and I like to see it. It wasn't long ago that I was speaking about how underutilized the HD Rumble has been on Switch, and that then takes us over to the handheld performance. It's really not a case of being any better, it's as good. 60 frames per second, a really nice, crisp and smoothly frame-paced image, and if you're coming to the series for the first time ever, this is a really nice way of playing it. I can't stress how important it will be for some people that they have modernized the control system. I still think they could have done a little more in terms of sensitivities, but I think you'd be clutching at straws if you've got many real complaints about what they've delivered here. The biggest gripe I think for most will be the fact that it's 35 quid. While that's not a particularly expensive price, you've got to remember that this will be the first of the trilogy, and they'll all cost the same. Would it have been nice to see them all released at the same time? Probably, but you know, this is decent. Gameplay wise, we are looking at the same experience, the same controls, the same levels, and unless Nintendo have sneakily snuck in some extra secrets, which they may well have done, I'm thinking this is just a visual makeover rather than one that affects gameplay. Still, the control improvements themselves already make it feel a lot more modern, and I didn't hesitate to slam 35 quid on it, and I'm sure many of you won't once you realise that the performance as well as the quality is right up there. Do let me know in the comments if there are any questions that you have about the game, and I'll try and answer them. I'll be in there for about the first hour after the release of this video, but hopefully this puts your mind at rest. It's well worth picking up. The only thing I haven't mentioned too much is the overall audio quality. Here's the original soundtrack, and here's the new one. I'll let you be the judge. Thanks so much for enjoying the content. Make sure you're subscribed if you enjoy these types of videos. And just a big thanks really to all of you that helped us get to 300,000 subscribers. Thanks to our Patreons and members. And as always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya!